They thought they'd found the perfect scapegoat when they blamed me for the security breach. What they didn't realize was that every keystroke, every file access, every desperate move they made was being recorded by the very system I had designed. My name is Diana Chen, and at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, I watched my boss use my own credentials to frame me for corporate espionage. By 5:30 p.m. that same day, those same credentials had exposed a conspiracy that reached all the way to the C-suite. This is the story of how they tried to destroy my career with my own password, and how that password became the key to their downfall. I've been building secure document systems for 15 years. At 38, I'm the kind of IT professional who understands that real security isn't about firewalls and encryption, it's about knowing exactly who has access to what, when, and why. It's about creating digital paper trails that can't be erased, altered, or denied. Meridian Financial hired me 3 years ago specifically to overhaul their document management infrastructure. They were hemorrhaging clients due to data breaches, losing contracts because sensitive information kept finding its way to competitors, and facing regulatory scrutiny that threatened their licenses in 4 states. I spent 18 months building what I called the Fortress Protocol, a document management system that didn't just store files, it tracked every interaction with surgical precision. Every login, every file opened, every download, every print command, even every second spent viewing a document. All logged, all timestamped, all stored in encrypted databases with multiple redundancies. The executives loved the security reports I generated, clean charts showing compliance rates, access patterns, productivity metrics. What they didn't know was that Fortress Protocol collected far more data than what appeared in those quarterly presentations. It was designed to be a digital omniscient eye, seeing everything, forgetting nothing. The system had 17 layers of access control, each more sophisticated than the last. Most employees only interacted with the first 3 layers, basic file storage and retrieval. Department heads worked within layers 4 through 7. Senior management operated in layers 8 through 12. But layers 13 through 17, those were mine alone, the architectural core where every action taken anywhere in the system was recorded, analyzed, and cross-referenced, a digital fortress with me as its sole guardian. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built the perfect surveillance system for a company that was about to try to destroy me with surveillance. The first sign of trouble came on a Monday morning in October. I arrived at Meridian's downtown office at 7:15 a.m., my usual time, to find the executive floor buzzing with unusual activity. Conference rooms that should have been empty were occupied by groups of senior partners huddled over laptops and speaking in hushed tones. Marcus Kellaway, our managing partner, emerged from his corner office looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His silver hair was disheveled, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, and his eyes held the kind of panic I'd seen only once before, during our worst security incident 18 months ago. "Diana," he called out, spotting me near the elevator. "My office now." The walk to his office felt longer than usual. Through the glass walls, I could see other employees beginning to arrive, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Our receptionist, Marie, caught my eye and shrugged, clearly as confused as everyone else. Marcus's office had been transformed into a war room. Legal documents covered his desk, laptops displayed financial spreadsheets, and his secure phone, the one reserved for the most sensitive conversations, was blinking with missed calls. "We have a problem," Marcus began without preamble. "The Henley Morrison acquisition is dead." Henley Morrison, the boutique investment firm we'd been courting for 8 months. The deal that would have added $340 million in assets under management to our portfolio. The acquisition that would have positioned Meridian as the dominant financial advisory firm in the Pacific Northwest. "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Our entire strategic proposal was leaked. Bidding strategies, client transition plans, financial projections, everything." Henley Morrison's board received anonymous copies of documents that should have been accessible only to our senior team. Marcus's jaw tightened. "They're accusing us of having internal security problems. The deal is off, and they're considering legal action for the breach of confidentiality." My stomach dropped. Every major acquisition document for Henley Morrison had been stored in Fortress Protocol's most secure layers. Access was limited to 12 people. The 5 senior partners, our lead acquisition attorney, 2 financial analysts, our compliance officer, and 3 external consultants who'd signed ironclad NDAs. "Have you traced the source of the leak?" I asked. "That's where you come in." Marcus pulled out a folder marked confidential in red letters. "IT forensics found evidence that the leaked documents were accessed using your administrative credentials at 3:47 a.m. last Tuesday." The words hit like a physical blow. That's impossible. I was home asleep at 3:47 a.m. I can prove it. My building's security cameras, my neighbor who was dealing with a crying baby, my Netflix viewing history. Diana, I want to believe you. But the digital trail is clear. Your username, your password, your administrative access codes. The documents were opened, downloaded, and transmitted to an external email account. All traced back to your login credentials. I felt the walls closing in, but my technical mind was already racing. Marcus, someone could have stolen my credentials. Corporate espionage isn't exactly uncommon in our industry. We need to investigate. We did investigate. He slid a thick report across his desk. 3 weeks of forensic analysis by Cyber Defense Solutions, the same firm that handles security for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Their conclusion is that the breach originated from your account, with no evidence of external infiltration or credential theft. I opened the report, scanning the technical details. It was thorough, professional, and completely wrong. The evidence looked damning: screenshots of my login, detailed access logs, even a reconstruction of the exact files that had been compromised. But I knew something the forensics team didn't. Fortress Protocol had been designed with a secret, a shadow logging system that recorded not just what was accessed, but how it was accessed. Mouse movement patterns, typing rhythms, behavioral biometrics that were unique to each user. It was my insurance policy, built into the deepest layers of the system architecture. If someone had used my credentials, the shadow logs would show the difference. But those logs existed in Layer 17, accessible only through protocols I'd never documented, using access codes I'd never shared. Marcus, I need time to investigate this properly. My own system has capabilities that. Diana, your access to all systems is suspended immediately. He stood, and I realized this wasn't a consultation. It was a termination meeting. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items only. Legal will be in touch regarding the criminal investigation. Criminal investigation? The FBI's white-collar crime division is involved. $340 million deals tend to attract federal attention when they're sabotaged by corporate espionage. Marcus's expression softened slightly. I hope you can prove your innocence, Diana, I really do. But until then, Meridian can't afford to have you anywhere near our systems. The security escort was professional but humiliating. 2 guards flanked me as I collected my few personal items: a coffee mug from my MIT reunion, a small cactus that had survived 3 years of office air conditioning, and a framed photo of my grandmother who'd taught me that patience and preparation always defeat rage and impulse. As we walked through the office, conversation stopped. Colleagues who'd worked with me for years looked away, already viewing me as a pariah. The whispers started before I'd even reached the elevator. But here's what Marcus Kellaway and his forensics experts didn't understand. Removing my official access to Fortress Protocol was like changing the locks on a house while leaving all the windows open. I'd built the system. I knew every secret entrance, every hidden pathway, every architectural quirk that hadn't made it into the official documentation. As the elevator doors closed on my career at Meridian Financial, I wasn't thinking about unemployment or legal fees or criminal charges. I was thinking about Layer 17 and the truth that was waiting there like a digital time bomb set to explode the moment I could reach it. My apartment had never felt more like a command center. Within 2 hours of my termination, I'd transformed my dining room into a forensics lab that would have impressed the same Cyber Defense Solutions team that had got everything so catastrophically wrong. 3 monitors displayed different aspects of what I was beginning to think of as the Marcus Kellaway problem. My personal laptop ran traffic analysis software, tracking network activity patterns around Meridian systems. My secure tablet displayed corporate organizational charts, mapping relationships and access privileges. And my desktop workstation, the one I'd never connected to any Meridian network, the one that existed in a completely isolated digital environment, was preparing to crack open the most sophisticated security system I'd ever built. Layer 17 access required more than just passwords. It required biometric verification, time-based authentication tokens, and something I called architectural sequences of commands that proved the user understood the system's deepest structures. It was like a digital DNA test, designed to ensure that only the system's creator could access its most sensitive functions. As my fingers moved across the keyboard, entering commands I'd memorized but never documented, I felt the familiar satisfaction of elegant code responding exactly as designed. Layer after layer of security peeled away, revealing the shadow logs that held the truth about Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. The data was beautiful in its precision. Every action taken in the Fortress protocol was recorded not just as a timestamp and file access, but as a complete behavioral profile. Mouse movement patterns showed hesitation, confidence, familiarity with interface layouts. Keystroke timing revealed natural typing rhythms versus copy and paste operations. Even the sequence of files accessed told a story about intent and knowledge. What I found in those logs made my blood run cold. The Tuesday morning breach hadn't been executed by someone who'd stolen my credentials. It had been executed by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, where to find it, and how to access it efficiently. The mouse movements were confident, the file selection strategic, the data extraction surgical in its precision, but the behavioral biometrics told a different story. The typing patterns were wrong, too fast, too mechanical, lacking the slight hesitations and corrections that characterized my natural rhythm. The mouse movements followed direct paths that I would never take, accessing files through menus I rarely used instead of the keyboard shortcuts I'd programmed into muscle memory. Someone with administrative knowledge of the system had used my credentials, but they'd made the classic mistake of assuming that digital impersonation was just about having the right passwords. They hadn't accounted for the shadow layer that tracked not just what was done, but how it was done. I pulled up the complete access log for the week before the breach, looking for patterns. What I found was systematic preparation. Starting 6 days before the Henley Morrison leak, my credentials had been used during unusual hours to access files that had nothing to do with my normal responsibilities. 3:23 a.m. Thursday. Human Resources Payroll Database 2:17 a.m. Friday. Legal Department Client Privilege Logs. 1:45 a.m. Sunday. Senior Partner Communication Archives 4:12 a.m. Monday. Acquisition Strategy Documents. Someone was conducting surveillance, using my access to map the company's most sensitive information. The Henley Morrison leak wasn't the crime, it was the cover story. The real crime was far more systematic and devastating. I cross-referenced the shadow logs with Meridian's physical security data, using my administrative access to the building's card reader system. The pattern became clear immediately. Every suspicious access to my credentials corresponded exactly with the card access times of Benjamin Torres, our Director of Strategic Development. Ben, who joined Meridian 8 months ago after a consulting break following his departure from Morrison Financial, Henley Morrison's parent company. Ben, who'd been assigned to the acquisition team specifically because of his intimate knowledge of Morrison's culture and expectations. Ben, who was sitting 3 offices away from mine every day, watching me enter my passwords and security codes while pretending to focus on his own computer screen. The picture became crystal clear. Ben Torres was a mole, planted by Morrison Financial to sabotage the acquisition from the inside. He'd used social engineering to capture my credentials, probably with a hidden camera or keystroke logging software installed on shared conference room computers. Then he'd waited for the perfect moment to use my access as cover for his real mission, gathering intelligence to help Morrison defend against our acquisition attempt, but something had gone wrong with his plan. Instead of just gathering defensive intelligence, he'd been caught in the act of accessing the leaked documents. So he'd improvised, using my credentials for the final data transmission and ensuring that all evidence pointed to me as the source of the breach. It was elegant, professional, and absolutely provable with the data I now possessed. I spent the next 4 hours building an irrefutable case. Screenshots of the behavioral analysis showing the difference between Ben's access patterns and my own. Time correlation data proving that every suspicious login coincided with his card access to the building. Financial records showing irregular payments from shell companies that traced back to Morrison Financial's legal department. But the smoking gun was in Ben's own email account, which he'd foolishly accessed using Meridian's network while logged in under my credentials. The shadow logs captured not just his file access, but his webmail traffic. 6 months of correspondence with Morrison executives, detailed plans for sabotaging the acquisition, and payment schedules for his espionage services. By 9:30 p.m., I had everything I needed to clear my name and destroy Ben Torres. But clearing my name wasn't enough anymore. Marcus Kellaway and his executive team had been so eager to find a scapegoat that they'd never bothered to conduct a real investigation. They'd accepted the first plausible explanation and hung me out to dry without a second thought. That kind of leadership incompetence deserved consequences. I opened a new analysis window and began mapping the real scope of Ben Torres' infiltration. If he'd been gathering intelligence for 6 months, the Henley Morrison leak was just the beginning. What else had he accessed? What other deals had been compromised? What other clients had been betrayed by Meridian's negligent security practices? The answer was worse than I'd imagined. Layer 17's analytical tools revealed the true scope of the disaster. Ben Torres hadn't just sabotaged the Henley Morrison acquisition, he'd been conducting systematic corporate espionage for 8 months, stealing client data, financial projections, and strategic plans for at least 12 major transactions. The Carver Industries merger that had fallen through due to market conditions, Ben had accessed those files 2 weeks before the deal collapsed. The Northpoint investment partnership that had mysteriously stalled in final negotiations, he'd downloaded their complete due diligence package. The Silverbridge acquisition that had been mysteriously outbid by Morrison Financial subsidiaries, Ben had transmitted our entire bidding strategy 3 days before the auction. Morrison Financial hadn't just planted a mole in our organization. They'd been systematically dismantling our business development for most of a year, using our own security systems against us while we blamed market forces and bad luck for our declining performance. But the most devastating discovery was in the executive communication logs. Ben Torres hadn't been operating alone. At 11:47 p.m., I uncovered an encrypted folder in the shadow logs that documented administrative access attempts to Layer 15, the executive communication archive. Someone with senior management credentials had been providing Ben Torres with updated passwords, meeting schedules, and strategic intelligence that only the senior partners should have known. The timestamps told the story. Every time Ben's access pattern suggested he was struggling to reach specific documents, a senior management account would access the same files within hours, often followed by Ben's successful access using refreshed credentials. Someone in Meridian's leadership was actively collaborating with the espionage operation. I ran correlation analysis on the executive access patterns, comparing timing, file selection, and behavioral biometrics across all senior management accounts. The results made my hands shake with rage. The collaborator was Richard Kellaway, Marcus's nephew and our deputy managing partner. The man who'd been positioned as Marcus's eventual successor, who'd been given unprecedented access to client relationships and strategic planning despite having only 3 years of experience at the firm. Richard's access patterns showed him systematically opening the same files that Ben Torres would access hours later. Email logs revealed that Richard had been using his administrative privileges to reset my passwords and security tokens, creating fresh credentials for Ben to use while ensuring that all activity traced back to my accounts. The method was sophisticated and nearly foolproof. Richard would generate new temporary credentials for my account using his executive override privileges. Ben would use those credentials for his espionage activities. Then Richard would delete the override logs and reset my credentials again, leaving only the evidence of Ben's activities associated with my normal passwords. It was a shell game designed to make me look like either a willing participant or a catastrophically negligent security administrator. Either way, I was the perfect fall guy for an operation that reached into the highest levels of Meridian's management. But there was something else in the logs, something that transformed my understanding of the entire situation. Richard Kellaway's collaboration with Ben Torres wasn't just about feeding intelligence to Morrison Financial. They were building a case to remove Marcus Kellaway from leadership and position Richard as the new managing partner. The documents they'd been targeting weren't just acquisition strategies. They were Marcus's personal communications with Meridian's board of directors, his succession planning discussions, and his confidential concerns about Richard's readiness for senior leadership. Ben Torres was feeding intelligence to Morrison Financial, but Richard Kellaway was using the same operation to gather ammunition for an internal coup. The espionage wasn't just about helping Morrison defend against our acquisition attempts. It was about positioning Richard to take control of Meridian itself once Marcus was removed for his failure to protect client confidentiality. The beauty of the scheme was its elegance. Richard would expose the espionage operation at exactly the right moment, positioning himself as the hero who discovered the security breach while simultaneously providing evidence that Marcus's leadership had been fatally compromised. I would be prosecuted as the negligent administrator, Ben would disappear back to Morrison Financial, and Richard would emerge as Meridian's savior. Except they'd made one critical mistake. They'd never imagined that the security system they were exploiting was designed by someone who understood that the greatest threats to corporate security come from the inside, not the outside. Layer 17 hadn't just been recording their espionage, it had been building a case against them with digital precision that would hold up in any criminal court in the country. At 1:23 a.m., I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply clearing my name and exposing Ben Torres, I was going to dismantle the entire conspiracy and ensure that both Ben and Richard faced the full consequences of their betrayal. But first, I was going to let them think they'd won. Thursday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The FBI had issued a warrant for my arrest on charges of corporate espionage, wire fraud, and theft of trade secrets. My face was on the business news networks as the IT administrator whose negligence destroyed a $340 million acquisition. Perfect, I spent the morning in my apartment, fielding calls from criminal defense attorneys and watching Meridian's stock price plummet in real-time trading. Every news report reinforced the narrative that Ben Torres and Richard Kellaway had crafted. Diana Chen, the trusted systems administrator who'd sold out her company for unknown financial gain. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the night preparing their downfall with the same systematic precision they'd used to frame me. The key was timing. Richard Kellaway was scheduled to present Meridian's comprehensive security review to the board of directors on Friday afternoon. According to the leaked executive calendar I'd accessed through Layer 17, he was planning to use that presentation to demonstrate Marcus's failure of leadership and position himself as the solution to the crisis. Ben Torres was scheduled to return to Morrison Financial on Monday morning, his consulting contract with Meridian having been completed successfully. He would disappear into Morrison's corporate structure, protected by attorney-client privilege and interstate commerce regulations that would make prosecution nearly impossible. They had 48 hours to execute their endgame. I had 48 hours to destroy them. At 10:30 a.m., I made my first move. Using Layer 17's communication monitoring capabilities, I began feeding carefully crafted disinformation into their operation. False evidence that I was preparing to flee the country. Fabricated financial records suggesting I'd received payments from Morrison Financial's competitors. Fake communication logs showing me coordinating with foreign intelligence services. The goal wasn't to convince anyone that these lies were true. The goal was to panic Ben Torres and Richard Kellaway into making mistakes. By noon, both of them were accessing their email accounts more frequently, communicating with their Morrison contacts, and making urgent phone calls from their personal devices. Layer 17 tracked all of it, building a real-time map of their panic responses and expanding network of collaborators. At 2:15 p.m., Richard Kellaway made his first critical error. Using his executive override privileges, he accessed my personnel file and modified my security clearance levels, apparently trying to make it look like I'd been systematically escalating my own access permissions over several months. What he didn't realize was that Layer 17 treated any modification to personnel records as a potential security threat, automatically creating backup copies of the original data and flagging the changes for forensic review. His alterations were preserved in perfect detail, along with timestamps proving exactly when and how he'd modified my file. At 4:47 p.m., Ben Torres made his own mistake. Believing that I was about to expose his operation, he began downloading insurance files, documents that would allow him to prove his cooperation with FBI investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. But the files he was downloading were from Layer 16, not the surface-level databases where actual case evidence would be stored. Layer 16 was where I'd placed my honey trap. Fictional documents that looked authentic but contained hidden watermarks and tracking codes that would identify anyone who transmitted them outside Meridian's networks. By 6:00 p.m., both Ben and Richard were digging themselves deeper into digital quicksand with every desperate move they made. Their attempts to cover their tracks were creating new evidence of their guilt. Their efforts to frame me more thoroughly were exposing the collaboration between them. At 8:30 p.m., I initiated the final phase of my counter-operation. I began transmitting the complete evidence package to a carefully selected list of recipients. Not just law enforcement and Meridian's board of directors, but Morrison Financial's board, the Sex Enforcement Division, the FBI's white-collar crime unit, and the business reporters who'd been covering Meridian's security crisis all week. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Behavioral analysis proving that Ben Torres had used my credentials for unauthorized access. Financial records showing payments from Morrison Financial to shell companies controlled by Ben and Richard. Communication logs documenting their conspiracy. Video reconstruction of their access patterns showing systematic data theft over 8 months. But the piece de resistance was the real-time monitoring footage of their panic responses over the past 36 hours. Layer 17 had captured Richard's illegal modification of my personnel records and Ben's attempt to download fabricated evidence files. It was like having video footage of the criminals returning to the scene of the crime with gasoline and matches. At 11:45 p.m., I called Marcus Kellaway directly. "Diana," his voice was strained, exhausted. "The FBI said you might try to contact me. I have to tell you that this call is probably being recorded." "Good," I said. "I want it recorded. Marcus, check your secure email. I've sent you something that will change everything." "Diana, whatever evidence you think you have." "I don't think I have evidence, Marcus. I know I have evidence." 8 months of systematic corporate espionage conducted by Ben Torres with the active collaboration of your nephew Richard. Complete financial records, communication logs, and real-time behavioral analysis that will hold up in any criminal court in the country. The silence on the phone lasted almost 30 seconds. "Marcus, are you still there?" "Jesus Christ, Diana, are you telling me that Richard? Your nephew has been working with Morrison Financial to destroy Meridian from the inside. The Henley Morrison deal was just the beginning. They've sabotaged at least 12 major transactions over the past 8 months, and they've been using my administrative credentials as cover for their operation." "But the forensics report." "The forensics report was wrong because they didn't have access to Layer 17. I built security measures into the Fortress protocol that I never documented, specifically to prevent exactly this kind of inside attack. Every move Ben and Richard made was recorded in perfect detail." Another long silence. "What do you need from me, Diana?" "Don't let Richard give his presentation tomorrow. Don't let Ben leave the building before the FBI arrives. And Marcus, you might want to call an emergency board meeting. This is going to get very complicated very quickly." Friday morning arrived with the kind of chaos that makes careers and destroys empires. I was having coffee in my kitchen when the first news alert appeared on my phone. Meridian Financial Deputy Managing Partner arrested in corporate espionage case. By the time I'd finished reading the article, 2 more notifications had arrived. Morrison Financial Consultant charged with wire fraud, and FBI raids Meridian offices in expanding financial crimes investigation. The evidence package I'd transmitted Thursday night had moved through law enforcement channels with unprecedented speed. By 6 a.m. Friday, federal agents were executing search warrants at Richard Kellaway's home, Ben Torres' apartment, and Morrison Financial's corporate headquarters in 3 different states simultaneously. At 8:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the timestamp I'd been framed with, my phone rang with a call from Marcus Kellaway. "Diana, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express." "You owe me more than an apology, Marcus. You owe me a career, a reputation, and about $340 million in lost business that your nephew helped sabotage." "Absolutely, legal is preparing a complete exoneration statement, and we're arranging for immediate reinstatement with full back pay and a promotion to Chief Information Security Officer. But Diana, I need your help. The FBI wants to interview you as a witness, and the board is demanding a complete security audit of every system in the company." "I'll cooperate with the FBI. As for the security audit, that's going to be expensive. My consulting rate has gone up considerably since yesterday." There was a pause. "Name your price." "Full access to implement security protocols across all Meridian subsidiaries. A budget of $2.5 million for infrastructure upgrades, and Richard's office, the corner one with the view of the harbor." "Done." At 10:15 a.m., I walked back into the Meridian building, wearing the same outfit I'd been escorted out in 2 days earlier. This time there was no security escort. Instead, Marcus Kellaway himself met me in the lobby, accompanied by 3 FBI agents and a Justice Department prosecutor who'd flown in from Washington specifically to interview me. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in how digital evidence can unravel even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracy. In Meridian's main conference room, I walked federal investigators through Layer 17's complete documentation of Ben Torres and Richard Kellaway's operation. The behavioral analysis alone was enough to prove that my credentials had been used by someone else, but Layer 17 had captured far more than just access logs. It had recorded email communications, financial transactions, meeting schedules, and even voice recognition data from conference calls that Ben and Richard believed were private. The FBI's lead investigator, Special Agent Sarah Mills, called it the most comprehensive corporate espionage case she'd encountered in 15 years of white-collar crime work. "Miss Chen, your security system didn't just catch these criminals, it documented their entire operation in real time. The evidence you've provided will make prosecution straightforward and conviction nearly certain." But the real satisfaction came at 3:30 p.m., when I was officially reinstated as Meridian's new Chief Information Security Officer, and given access to Richard Kellaway's former office. The view from the 47th floor was spectacular. Harbor to the east, mountains to the west, and the city sprawling out below like a circuit board made of glass and steel. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about the events of the past 3 days and the strange justice of corporate warfare. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Mills. Tours just agreed to full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Richard Kellaway is facing 15 to 20 years federal time. Morrison Financial's board fired their entire executive team this morning. You built quite a fortress, Miss Chen. I smiled and typed back, I built it to protect the people I work with. Sometimes the best defense is making sure the truth survives any attack. At 5:00 p.m., Marcus knocked on my office door. The board voted unanimously to approve your security budget and authority over all subsidiary systems. They also voted to offer you Richard's position as deputy managing partner if you're interested in expanding beyond it. I considered the offer. Deputy managing partner would mean responsibility for business development, client relationships, and strategic planning. It would mean leaving the technical work I loved for the corporate politics I'd always avoided. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, but I think I'm more valuable doing what I do best, making sure something like this never happens again. Fair enough, but Diana, there's something else. The Henley Morrison deal is back on the table. They want to proceed with the acquisition, but only if you personally guarantee the security of all data transfers and due diligence processes. That was interesting. What are the terms? Original price plus a $50 million security and compliance bonus if the deal closes without any information leaks. That bonus goes directly to your department's budget. I thought about Layer 17, about the surveillance capabilities I'd built but never fully utilized, about the possibility of implementing truly unbreachable security across a financial empire that would span 12 states and manage over $2 billion in assets. I'll need complete authority over all IT systems across both companies during the integration process. You'll have it. And I want Bentor's former desk moved into storage. I don't want any reminder of what poor security practices can cost. Already done. As Marcus left my office, I turned back to the harbor view and began planning the most secure corporate merger in financial industry history. Layer 17 had been my insurance policy, designed to protect against exactly the kind of inside attack that Bentor's and Richard Kellaway had attempted. Now it was time to scale that protection across an entire corporate empire. At 7:30 p.m., as I was reviewing architectural plans for Meridian's new security infrastructure, my personal phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Miss Chen. This is Jennifer Morrison, CEO of Morrison Financial. I paused, finger hovering over the disconnect button. Miss Morrison, I assume you're calling about your former employee. Actually, I'm calling about a job offer. Morrison Financial is restructuring our entire IT department after the Bentor's incident. We're looking for a chief information security officer who understands the complexities of financial industry data protection. The audacity was breathtaking. Miss Morrison, are you seriously trying to recruit the person who just exposed your company's corporate espionage operation? I'm trying to recruit the person who built a security system so effective that it caught our espionage operation and documented it well enough to ensure criminal convictions. That's exactly the kind of capability Morrison Financial needs. I laughed. Miss Morrison, I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite happy building fortress protocols for companies that don't try to destroy their competitors through criminal activity. The offer is $400,000 base salary, plus equity, plus a $50 million budget for security infrastructure development. I paused. That was more money than I'd make in 5 years at Meridian. Miss Morrison, let me make something clear. My fortress protocols aren't for sale to the highest bidder. They're for protecting the people and organizations I choose to work with. And I choose to work with people who understand that real success comes from building better solutions, not from stealing other people's work. I understand. But if you ever change your mind, I won't. I hung up and immediately called Agent Mills to report the attempted recruitment. Attempting to hire the key witness in an ongoing federal investigation was probably another federal crime Morrison Financial's lawyers would have to explain. At 9:45 p.m., I finally left my new office and walked through Meridian's empty floors. In 72 hours, I'd gone from accused criminal to chief information security officer. I'd exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of 2 major corporations. I'd handed the FBI their biggest corporate espionage case in years, but the real victory wasn't about vindication or promotion or even justice. The real victory was about proving that competence and preparation could defeat politics and corruption every time. They'd tried to use my own password against me at 8:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. By Friday evening, that same password had given me the keys to their entire criminal operation. As I walked to my car, I thought about Layer 17 and the digital fortress I'd built to protect the companies I served. Tomorrow, I'd begin expanding that fortress across an entire financial empire, creating security protocols that would make corporate espionage not just difficult, but impossible. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day from Marcus Kellaway. "Deanna, the board asked me to tell you that Meridian's stock price closed up 23% today. Apparently, investors like the idea of having unbreachable security. Thank you for saving our company." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for learning to value competence over politics. See you Monday." As I drove home through the city lights, I realized that Ben Torres and Richard Kellaway had actually done me a favor. Their attempt to destroy my career had forced me to reveal capabilities I'd kept hidden, demonstrated value I'd never fully showcased, and positioned me to build something far greater than anything I could have achieved in the shadows. 6 months later, I stood in the same corner office, but everything else had changed. The Henley Morrison acquisition had closed 3 weeks ahead of schedule, creating the largest independent financial advisory firm on the West Coast. More importantly, it had created the testing ground for security protocols that were revolutionizing how financial institutions protect sensitive data. Layer 17 had evolved into something I called the Guardian Protocol, a comprehensive security ecosystem that didn't just monitor access patterns, but predicted and prevented security threats before they could materialize. Instead of catching criminals after they'd committed crimes, Guardian identified suspicious behavioral patterns and neutralized threats while they were still in the planning stages. The system had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The Federal Reserve wanted to license Guardian for community bank security assessments. The Securities and Exchange Commission was considering making similar protocols mandatory for investment firms managing over $1 billion in assets. 3 foreign governments had made discreet inquiries about adapting Guardian for national security applications, but the most satisfying validation came from an unexpected source: Morrison Financial's bankruptcy filing. Without Ben Torres' intelligence pipeline, Morrison had lost their competitive advantage in the Pacific Northwest market. Their aggressive acquisition strategy, built on stolen intelligence and inside information, had collapsed when they could no longer anticipate their competitors' moves. The legal fees from defending against federal criminal charges had drained their cash reserves, and the revelation that their leadership had been systematically engaged in corporate espionage had destroyed their reputation with both clients and investors. Morrison Financial had been sold to a Chicago-based firm for roughly 30% of their previous valuation. Jennifer Morrison herself had been banned from holding executive positions at any federally regulated financial institution. Justice, it turned out, was sometimes delayed but rarely denied when you had the right evidence properly preserved. My phone rang at 4:15 p.m. with a call from Agent Mills. "Deanna, I thought you'd want to know that Richard Kellaway just accepted a plea agreement. 12 years federal time, full restitution to Meridian Financial, and permanent ban from the financial services industry." "What about Ben Torres?" 8 years, plus he's cooperating with our investigation into Morrison Financial's other espionage operations. Apparently, your case was just the tip of the iceberg. We're looking at systematic intelligence gathering targeting at least 20 financial firms across 6 states. I leaned back in my chair, processing the scope of what we'd uncovered. How many other companies were compromised? That's classified for now, but let's just say your Guardian protocol is going to be very much in demand once this investigation goes public. After ending the call, I walked to my window and looked out at the harbor. The same view that Richard Kellaway had enjoyed while planning to destroy his uncle's company and frame me for corporate espionage. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now using his former office to build security systems that would prevent exactly the kind of crimes he'd committed. At 5:30 p.m., Marcus knocked on my door. "Deanna, I just got off the phone with the board. They've approved your proposal for Guardian Protocol licensing." I'd submitted the proposal 3 months ago. Instead of keeping Guardian proprietary to Meridian, we would license the technology to other financial institutions, creating both a new revenue stream and an industry-wide improvement in security standards. "What are the terms?" "You retain full technical control and oversight of all Guardian implementations. Meridian gets 60% of licensing revenue, you get 40%. and the board approved your request for a dedicated research facility. The research facility was my long-term vision, a completely independent security laboratory where I could develop next-generation protective protocols without corporate interference or profit pressure. A place where the technology could evolve based on actual security needs rather than quarterly earnings targets. There's one more thing, Marcus continued. The FBI wants to discuss a consulting arrangement. Apparently, they're interested in adapting Guardian for federal law enforcement applications. I considered the implications. Guardian Protocol had been designed to protect corporate data, but its behavioral analysis capabilities could theoretically be applied to any kind of information security challenge. Counterintelligence, financial crimes investigation, even cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. Set up a meeting. But Marcus, any federal work has to be completely separate from our commercial operations. I won't have Guardian turned into a surveillance tool for corporate clients. Understood, the board supports maintaining clear ethical boundaries around the technology. As Marcus left, I realized that Ben Torr's and Richard Kellaway's conspiracy had accidentally created something unprecedented. A security technology that was both commercially valuable and ethically sound, built by someone who understood that the greatest security threats come from the inside, not the outside. At 7:00 p.m., I made one final decision of the day. I called my former team from the original Fortress Protocol development project, the programmers and analysts who'd been scattered to other companies when I was terminated. Sarah, it's Diana Chen. How would you like to help me build the most advanced corporate security system in the world? One by one, I called them back. The people who'd understood my vision, who'd helped build the original Layer 17 architecture, who'd trusted my methods even when they didn't fully understand them. By 9:00 p.m., I had commitments from 7 of the 10 original team members to join Guardian Protocol's development staff. They were tired of building security systems that treated employees as threats. They wanted to build systems that protected everyone while respecting everyone. We would start Monday morning in the new research facility with unlimited budgets and complete technical independence. We would build security protocols that made corporate espionage impossible while preserving the collaboration and innovation that made companies successful. And we would do it as a team, the way it should have been done from the beginning. 1 year after the day they'd fired me at 8:47 a.m., I received an invitation that made me smile. The annual Financial Security Conference wanted me to deliver the keynote address on behavioral analytics in corporate security. Lessons from the Meridian financial case. The conference was being held at the same hotel where Morrison Financial had held their leadership retreat 18 months earlier, the retreat where Ben Torres had apparently received his final instructions for sabotaging the Henley Morrison acquisition. I accepted the invitation immediately. Standing at the podium before 800 financial industry executives, I looked out at an audience that included many of the same people who'd read about my criminal negligence in the business press 12 months earlier. The same people who'd questioned whether Meridian Financial could be trusted with their assets after our security crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, I want to tell you about the morning I was fired for a security breach I didn't commit, and how that termination led to exposing the largest corporate espionage network in financial industry history. The presentation took 45 minutes. I walked them through the technical details of behavioral analytics, the methods we'd used to catch Ben Torres and Richard Kellaway, and the broader implications for industry security standards. But the most important part came at the end. The Meridian Financial case wasn't really about corporate espionage, it was about the difference between security theater and actual security. Too many organizations invest in systems that make them feel safe without actually making them safer. They focus on external threats while ignoring the reality that most security breaches come from trusted insiders who have been given access without adequate oversight. I clicked to my final slide. A diagram of the Guardian Protocol architecture. Real security isn't about keeping people out. It's about knowing exactly who's inside, what they're doing, and whether their actions match their legitimate business needs. It's about building systems that protect everyone while trusting everyone to do their jobs professionally. The applause was sustained and genuine. During the Q&A session, 3 different CEOs asked about licensing Guardian Protocol for their organizations. 2 federal regulators requested private meetings to discuss industry-wide security standards, and 1 question from the audience made the entire year's work worthwhile. Ms. Chen, what advice would you give to IT professionals who are concerned about insider threats but worried about implementing surveillance systems that could undermine workplace trust? I thought about Ben Torres, about Richard Kellaway, About the morning I'd been escorted out of my own building by security guards who knew I wasn't guilty, but had to follow orders. Build systems that assume good faith while documenting everything. Trust your colleagues to do their jobs professionally, but verify that professional behavior with objective data. And most importantly, remember that the goal of security isn't to catch criminals. It's to make criminal behavior impossible while preserving the collaborative environment that makes organizations successful. After the conference, I flew back to Seattle and drove directly to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I sat by her headstone for an hour, telling her about Guardian Protocol, about the research facility, about the team of brilliant people who were building something that would protect honest professionals from the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. She'd always taught me that patience and preparation defeat rage and impulse. The past year had proven that lesson in ways I'd never expected. At 8:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the anniversary of my termination, I stood in my office looking out at the harbor and thinking about the strange mathematics of justice. They'd tried to destroy my career using my own password. That password had become the key to exposing their crimes and building something far greater than anything I could have achieved if they'd simply left me alone. Ben Torres was serving 8 years in federal prison. Richard Kellaway was serving 12. Morrison Financial had ceased to exist as an independent entity, and I was running a security research laboratory that was revolutionizing how financial institutions protect their most sensitive data. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Mills. "Diana, thought you want to know that the Guardian Protocol evidence just helped us close another corporate espionage case. A tech company in Portland was being systematically infiltrated by Chinese intelligence operatives. Your behavioral analysis tools caught them in 3 weeks. Thank you for building something that protects all of us." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for believing the evidence when everyone else wanted to believe the politics." As I prepared to leave the office, I made one final check of Guardian Protocol's monitoring dashboard. Across 17 different financial institutions, the system was quietly watching for the behavioral patterns that indicated insider threats, external infiltration, or systematic data theft. No alerts, no suspicious activities. No corporate espionage in progress, just honest professionals doing honest work in an environment where the technology protected them instead of spying on them. At 9:15 p.m., I turned off my computer and headed home, thinking about the team meeting we had scheduled for Monday morning. We were starting development on Guardian Protocol 3.0, which would extend our behavioral analysis capabilities to protect against artificial intelligence-based attacks and automated data mining operations. The future of corporate security was going to be built by people who understood that the best fortress isn't one that keeps everyone out. It's one that lets the right people in, while ensuring that no one can betray the trust that makes collaboration possible. They'd used my password at 8:47 a.m. to frame me for their crimes. By building the system that caught them, I'd proven that competence and preparation always defeat politics and corruption. And that was a lesson worth sharing with every honest professional who'd ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. If this story of corporate payback resonated with you, you found the right community. Here at Corporate Payback Stories, we share stories of professionals who refuse to be underestimated and prove that competence always defeats politics. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell if you believe that hard work and integrity deserve respect. Share this video with someone who's ever felt undervalued at work. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated in your career? How did you prove them wrong? Your professional stories inspire our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, work